brother, as the case usually is. My older brother used to teach middle school band. He teaches elementary school music now. But he used to teach middle school band for a good 10, 11 years in this little podunk town outside of Ann Arbor. And we thought it would be a cool project his first year teaching there if I would write a piece for a 7th grade band for their spring concert. And since we had both grown up in playing in bands since probably 6th, 7th grade anyhow, we were both very familiar with how bands worked and how young bands worked. So I wrote this piece for free, of course, because most of the time when you write music, you're doing it for free, at least at the beginning anyhow, and the beginning is generally 10, 15 years worth. So I wrote a piece, and then we decided to do it again the next year, and it turned into a yearly project for a good 10 years, where every year I would write a piece for his 7th grade band to premiere. Well, that was back in '99 that this started, and then in 2000, a really a big name in the band world, Mark Camphouse, if any of you have heard of him. He started this thing through the National Band Association called the Young Composers Mentor Project, and I submitted a band piece that I had written while I was still in undergrad, and it was accepted. So I got to go and go down to the National Band Association convention in San Antonio. I think it was San Antonio. It was San something in Texas, San Antonio, we'll say, and spent 3 days working with him and 2 other band composers, and just meeting conductors, going to concerts, talking about writing for band, all kinds of good stuff. And in one of my little mini lessons with Mark Camphouse, I showed him the young band piece that I wrote for my brother that first year, and he thought it looked pretty good and said, you know what, I'm going to forward this to my publisher. So he did that, and his publisher liked the piece, and they ended up publishing it. Well, a couple years later, I'd written another piece, and I was going to send it to that same publisher, but at the concert, at that original Mentor Project performance of the band pieces of all of us who were accepted into it back in 2000, was a guy who was associated with this new up-and-coming publishing company called Grand Mesa Music. And he really liked my piece, and he thought that I should meet the owner of Grand Mesa Music Publishers, who happened to have a booth at a conference called the Midwestern Clinic on Band and Orchestra Music they hold in Chicago every December, which I used to go to quite a bit until my final exam schedule wouldn't allow me to anymore. So anyway, back in like 2000, I don't know, 2001-ish maybe, I met with the owner of Grand Mesa, and he was really interested in the second young band piece that I had written, and decided to publish that. And he became a really big proponent of my music. He was really interested in getting because he was it was such a young company. He was really interested in getting materials out there to band directors, some quality material. So he would always record every new piece that came out in a catalog year. They would always record every new piece and put it on a CD or 2 and send that out to just every band director they could think of in the country. And eventually another piece caught on called Agincourt 1415, about the Battle of Agincourt. It's if you're familiar with Shakespeare's Henry V, it's the battle at the end of that play. So off and on, every couple of years, I've been publishing a piece with them for young band that mainly grew out of this little project that I originally started with my brother for his 7th grade band. and turned into a decent little career writing music for young bands. Um, yeah, I don't think I left anything out. I think that's the story.
So, was there
Yeah.
anything in particular about the way your music worked or sounded that really turned the guy at that publishing company on? Like, was there something specific that he told you that he really liked about your music?
Um, well, have you heard young band music before? The typical young band music? Been
Yeah,
to a seventh grade band concert and you listen to the stuff that they play?
Loch Lomond.
Yeah, it's there are basically the pieces that I would write because I had actually studied composition and I was an actual composer and had the expensive pieces of paper to prove it. Um, as opposed to most people who write for young band, which are actually music educators. They are band directors who write these little tunes for their bands for the abilities of, say, a sixth or seventh or eighth grader, and they work well for the instrument. They sound great at a concert, but musically they are lacking because these guys are or they're not composers. It's not what they do. Their main focus was making sure that they could use use the notes that they taught the kids to play on their instruments that year. Whereas the music that I wrote it first and foremost. It had to be something that I wanted to hear, and it didn't matter what level the piece was at. It just had to be it had to be interesting enough that I personally would want to hear that piece of music. Um, and I think that
Paraphrase.
was the primary difference.
I'm going to paraphrase. The field is full of hacks, is what he's saying.
Well, good intentioned hacks, but yeah, just a lot of non-composers trying to compose. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have some questions, but does anybody have anything yet? I was wondering, when you're writing a piece for young band, do you have trouble? For instance, sophomore music theory projects have been going on here at school, and I've been asked to look at lots of these things.
Hmm.
And they need to be like 2 minutes long or whatever. And I've looked at some like 6 minute grand opus kind of ordeals. In other words, people lose control of the complexity. So I'm
Right.
wondering if that's an issue, because we did listen to the standard model a minute ago. And do you have
Definitely not.
trouble keeping yourself under control when, this is like an eighth grade band? Do you sometimes lose control and like make it too hard and have to reel it back a little bit? How do you deal?
Yes, actually. In fact, the hardest things for me to write are the pieces for young ensembles, simply because of the limitations. Limitations are great for composing in terms of limiting your compositional materials. Doing a lot with very little material, basically the idea of economy of materials, well, that's basically just good composition. But when you're also limited by what your performers ultimately can do, and you have to think about the fact that, okay, this piece, no matter how you write it, no matter how you score it, it's probably not going to be performed the way that you had hoped, because at any given middle school, they're going to have 100 percussionists, 17 alto saxophones, one flute, and maybe 15 trumpets, and if you're really lucky, you might get somebody who plays in the bass clef. So it's such a mixed bag of ensembles out there and ability levels, that you have to keep those things in mind, and you have to remember that, okay, well, if you're going to include, say, an oboe in a young band piece, well, that's great, but you better make sure that you double that oboe somewhere else. It better be doubled with a clarinet, which is a terrible doubling, but or with a trumpet or something. It's got to be doubled somewhere else. Essentially, the best way to think about writing for young ensembles or for writing educational music is to think of it as a piece of music that has no more than, say, 3 to 5 different parts. So maybe your standard 4-part SATB, that's ideally what you would be going for when writing for a young ensemble. And then you just expand it out to the number of instruments that you would have in a young band, and you're going to be doubling a lot of lines in a lot of places. That's just how it has to work, because because middle school performers, they have to have the security of somebody else playing their part as well. Otherwise, it's a very daunting thing. Solo playing is a very daunting thing for for your average 12-year-old. So keeping all of that in mind, a lot of times what I'll do is I will write. I will try to come up with certain compositional materials that are already lend themselves to a very specific thinned texture, that are not terribly complex, that are generally rather diatonic a lot of times, sometimes modal, sometimes, but they don't go out there too far. And once I've limited myself to just that, to do this is what it's going to be, and it's not going to be anything else, then it gets a little bit easier to write. But making sure that you stay within those confines it's some of the most difficult writing to do as a composer. Absolutely. It really is.
So this is something that we've talked about. I'm sure at least some of you and I have had this conversation about creating the box you're going to compose in, right? Modern composers can literally do anything, It could be an oboe solo, or it could be the sound of a donkey laughing, and anything in between, whatever you want. It's all fine. Sometimes. So more so than Mozart, we have to decide what our parameters are going to be. And sometimes it's quite artificial, you decide what it is. And once you have that box, then it's a lot easier to proceed compositionally. Yes, Jacob?
Yeah, my question was, how do you balance composing for wind ensemble and young bands?
Like serious music versus educational music, right?
Yeah, how do you balance between the two?
Oh, good question. I guess I just I put myself in the mindset of whatever project I happen to be working on at any given time. I don't know. It's the same way that you would balance, watching The Big Bang Theory followed by an episode of The Walking Dead. Those two have nothing to do with each other, two completely different genres, but you can get into both of them once you're in that particular mindset. If you know what the expectations are and where you're going to be while you're working on that piece, then you can just you prepare yourself for it, and you put yourself there, and just make sure that you stay there. It's you just make sure you maintain your focus. If I'm going to be writing a young band piece, then I have to make sure that I stay focused on this is what I'm doing, and I'm not doing those other things. And if I happen to come up with some cool ideas that would work for a more advanced piece, that's great. I'll write them down, and then I will set them aside and deal with them later, because they simply are inappropriate for what I'm doing right now. So you just decide what the activity is, and you consciously limit yourself to that activity.
So actually, I've never asked you this, Matt. Are you a one thing at a time composer? Because we have some composers in the studio who are starting to work on multiple projects at the same time. Like one is sort of, getting more close to finished, but they're letting it stew a little bit. And while that happens, they'll work on something else. Do you tend to stay focused on one thing until it's completely done? Or do you kind of mix and match a little bit?
Well, it depends on the deadline, and it depends on the paycheck, to be honest. Usually I will be working on at least 2 projects at any given time, sometimes more. And generally, if I'm working on two projects, generally it's going to be one that I'm getting paid to write, and it's generally going to be something that I don't necessarily. It will have parameters that I don't necessarily really. They're not my ideal parameters. For instance, I just finished a trio for trumpet, violin, or sorry, trumpet, cello, and percussion. And one of the stipulations was that the material somehow had to reference Mexican culture or Mexican history or Mexican themes. It was for a group in Corpus Christi. So, well, the only thing that I know about Mexican anything is is what you get at Taco Bell. So I had to go and do a whole bunch of research. It wasn't exactly it wasn't my forte, really. However, I also am writing a chamber opera on the side, and when I would get stuck on the trio, I could go and I could work on an aria. And when I get stuck on the aria, I would think, okay, well, maybe I'll go work on the trio for a little bit and see what happens, and see if something in that somehow ends up solving the issue I was having in the aria. And most of the time, it tends to work out. So I do like to have multiple projects going on at any given time, unless the schedule is too tight and just doesn't allow it. So it's, yeah, I'm as scatterbrained as my schedule will allow me to be, I guess.
Do you have a question, Austin?
Yeah, I was actually wondering.
Speak up.
When you're writing young band music, what are like some, I mean, you talked about you have to have limitations, but what are some things that you would say in your experience that you just would not do for any young bands?
Did you hear that?
Yeah, some things I would not do for any young bands. Well, I don't know if there are necessarily things that I would just never do, but there are. I mean there are. Okay, I would never write a high C for a trumpet. That's for sure. I would definitely keep all instruments within their most basic, generally low to middle tessitura. I would never write anything that is difficult to count. I would never write anything that has too many changing meters or is too chromatic, simply because it's too much work to put together for musicians who are that young, who just haven't been doing it long enough to have the experience to do those kinds of things. So the music, again, it tends to be mostly diatonic. Every once in a while, it will wander off from that. Using modes are great. Using extended harmony or maybe some choral quintal harmony, but within a diatonic set, is a good way to get new and interesting sounds out of your major scale or what have you. But yeah, I mean, they're just more advanced techniques that more advanced performers can do. Well, you just wouldn't be able to do that with a 12-year-old. So you just have to consider who's your audience, who are you writing this for, and what are they capable of, and knowing that's your starting point for where you're going to go with it. I don't know if that really answered your question, but okay, good.
When you ask the question, who's your audience, that it's band director and it's the students, because a band director can be really turned on by your piece, but if the students hate it, a band director can only whip them into submission so much. They're not going to get behind a piece in practice if they just hate it, right?
Oh, no, well, so they won't get behind the piece in practice even if they love it sometimes. Yeah. Middle school, what are you gonna do? Yeah. Yeah, they're more, most of the time they're more interested in the raging hormones and the bad decisions that come with them. So, what are you gonna do? But yeah, it definitely helps if the music that the band is playing is something that they can actually get into. And it's not always necessarily about difficulty. I mean, it can't get too difficult, but one thing that I've noticed over the years is that when writing for a certain level, say a seventh grade band, I've been able to generally push them a little bit beyond their ability, as long as what I was asking them to do was worth them learning it. It was something that they wanted to learn, that sounded cool enough that it was worth learning. So, for instance, in fugue state, there's that middle statement of the fugue where it gets really dissonant, and the brass and whoever else plays it, I can't remember. I'd have to look at the score again. It's been a few years. I'm sorry. They really get into it, even though it's dissonant. It's not about. They don't have to worry about tuning their dissonances, or they don't have to worry about that. They just get to kind of let loose and for a few measures just kind of just let it be ugly. So it's. I'm sorry. What was the original question?
I think that answered it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, you'll have to excuse me. I've been teaching theory classes since almost before the sun was up. So yeah. Anyway.
So, and in fugue state, as an example, I think like if there's a very, very dissonant section in there that's somewhere around the golden mean, where it's like some impact points and they're grinding dissonances in the basses. And the thing is, that's like the payoff. You know, if you started with that, they probably wouldn't like it so much. But when you let it build into that,
yeah,
if you get there, they're like, okay, I'll accept this. And it seems like you got to sell it to the students first, and then they'll be able to sell it to their parents, which ultimately is who is going to be.
Well, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the fugue subject itself is very simple. It's very diatonic. There's rhythmically there's not much to it. It's all conjunct stepwise motion for the most part. There's just not a whole lot to it. You could hear it once or twice, and you could probably sit down and plunk it out at a piano and get it right the first time. It's a really easy, very straightforward earworm bit of a melody. Well, those are great because you can take those and you can do all kinds of things with them that you normally couldn't do with other things, just because they are so recognizable. You can get pretty crazy with them, and they will still be recognizable because that's just how they're constructed. They have a very, they've got a hook. If you have a hook, you can get away with doing a lot more to the hook, because the hook is going to come through no matter how many layers of dissonance or how much no matter what you throw at it compositionally. If it's a hook, it's always going to be a hook. It's still going to be there.
Yeah. Anybody?
Do you feel like you get the same kind of like artistic satisfaction? Yeah, that's the right word. Out of writing the young band stuff as you do like the more complicated music?
It's not the same amount necessarily. It's not about amounts of satisfaction as much as it is a different kind of satisfaction. I do the different. I write for the different ensembles for different reasons. It's like what would be a good analogy? Well, it'd be like if you want pizza, you're not going to go and order some Thai food. You're just not going to do it. There's nothing wrong with one or the other, but one is not going to satisfy certain conditions that the other does. So it's just doing one thing is satisfying in certain ways, and doing the other thing is satisfying in other ways. And it just it just depends, and you got to take your satisfaction where you can get it. Writing for young bands is great because they are very enthusiastic, and if you write a successful young band piece, the kids will love it, and then the directors will love you because you gave them something that their kids will love, and that makes their band sound good at the spring concert in front of the principal, so that their band program doesn't get cut, and the parents will love it. And it basically, you've made them look good because you got the students excited about it. It might not be, it might not be music that's going to set the world afire, but it has a different purpose. So there is satisfaction in that. If I want to, write music that really does something profound or gritty, or something else that is just about the music, and screw the audience, who cares? Then that's a different type of satisfaction. That's a personal satisfaction, an intellectual satisfaction, or an aesthetic satisfaction on my part. So they're just different kinds of satisfaction, really.
I would also suggest that it's a question of scale. It's like comparing two things that not only are different in how they affect you personally, but different in scale. Writing fugue state is way different 4 minutes than writing a 3-movement piece that's gigantic and complex like the standard model.
Well,
so it's not
sure.
Satisfaction, it's the scale.
Yeah, and I didn't have to research particle physics for a year in order to write fugue state, so there's that too. It was a completely different kind of project. It was whereas fugue state was something that satisfied a commission so that I could get paid. So
that's a certain type of satisfaction too.
Yeah. There is that satisfaction as well. You can be convinced to write something that maybe you're not necessarily terribly enthusiastic about, if the price is right, and if your card needs gas and you need groceries and rent is due. So there are advantages to that as well.
So I am wondering, we're talking about quote educational pieces.
Sure.
But that's sort of broadly defined just means pieces that are playable by young bands. Do you ever think educationally, as in they can learn X, Y, and Z by playing this piece? Like, for instance, they can learn what a fugue is and how a fugue functions by playing fugue state, should the band director choose to address that with them. Do you ever think in those terms about your young band music?
Sometimes. It depends on the piece. Sometimes the piece is just what it is, and it has nothing to do with any of that. Sometimes it's all about just, oh, well, this sounds cool and might be kind of fun. But there are pieces, in fugue state, it does teach what a fugue is and what a fugue does. Going back to one of the earlier pieces I mentioned, Agincourt 1415. It's about an historical battle, so it can be used to teach a little bit of history, or even a little bit of Shakespeare, if so desired, because Shakespeare wrote about it too. So if sometimes I will try to go for that if the idea lends itself to it. Other times it's just if I got a good idea and the deadline's coming up, you can only do what you can do. So,
right. So there's been a big move over the past decade, let's say, which is sort of the time period in which you've been getting these pieces published.
Mm-hmm.
Self-publishing has become way more common, and we both know John Mackey, for instance. There's some very successful composers who never deal with a publishing company whatsoever. Have your thoughts? I mean, you're one of the composers who gets to work with a publisher and get your music out there that way. Do you have your thoughts about working with a publishing company and their role in the system changed over the past decade?
Yeah, I think so. I think publishing companies have gotten more and more conservative in what they publish because of self-publishing. They take fewer risks, and they scale back things that they will put in their catalog to very specific styles that they know will sell. Because now they have to compete with the likes of John Mackey, who, you just go to his website and you put in your credit card number, or you do PayPal for whatever ridiculous amount of money he charges for his music, and he will send it right to you. The other issue with working with a publisher, though, working with a publisher, it sounds good. It sounds good on paper, to be a published composer. Oh, you're a published composer, so you must be a real composer. You're a professional. Well, you don't need to be published in order to be a professional, real composer. A publisher, the only thing a publisher really will do for you is they will take care of all they will take care of all of the printing and distribution of the music, but they do so at quite a cost. The usual publishing contract for publishing music is the music retailer, like say a music store, like you guys have J.W. Pepper down there, or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Generally, they get 40 to 50% of the list price of a piece of music. Like say it might be about score and parts to be, let's say, $60. Okay, so they get about half of that, and then what's left over is for the publisher and the composer. And then the publisher has to take out expenses, and what's left is the publisher gets 10% of retail profit, and the composer gets 10% retail of profit. So if you're selling through a publisher, you're doing so at a great cost to the income that you could make if you were self-publishing. If you can self-publish and you can get enough people to buy your music directly from you without the publisher as a middleman, you're going to keep 90 to 95% of the profit, depending on how complicated the score is and how much time you got to spend at Kinko's to put it together. But if you're publishing through a publisher and they take care of all of that, and they put you in the catalog, and then they send it out, they advertise it, they go to the conferences, and they put your music on display, and they distribute it, and all that good stuff, well, that takes time and effort, and that takes a lot of money. And if for every piece of music of mine that sells or that retails for $60, I will get all of $6 profit from that. So there is quite it's publishing music is not a very good deal necessarily for the composer. It looks good on paper, but self-publishing, if you can do it, if you can find enough people who want to buy your music, that's really a better way to go, because you're going to keep more of the profit.
The publishing company might also do a marching band of arrangement of one of your pieces without telling you about it, right?
Exactly. Yes, which is exactly what happened. Yeah. The publisher, Grand Mesa, they took one of my earlier band pieces that was one of their better sellers of mine, and they decided, well, let's do up a marching band arrangement. And so they got some staff arranger that they had sitting around and had him do up a 6-minute version of the piece for marching band, even though the piece is only like, I don't know, 4 minutes anyhow. I don't know where he got 6 minutes out of it, but
drum break.
Yeah, probably. There you go, drum break. But then, if you're writing for marching band, that's a whole completely different animal in and of itself as well. So there were several key things in the piece that were characteristic of the piece that personally I think well, that he left out that I think he shouldn't have left out. Yeah, the main melody is there, and there's, you got your basic sections that are still there, but other than that, it's not really the piece. But the publisher can do that because by publishing, you signed over the copyright to the publisher. You signed over your rights in exchange for 10% of retail, which does not add up to a whole lot. So, so if you're going to publish things that that would sell to there's a big audience for, but that maybe musically are not that personally important to you, like young band music. My young band music, I generally try to publish that. But something like the standard model, I would never ever send that to a publisher. First of all, because they would never publish it because they wouldn't know how to sell it. Because it's about particle physics, and there is no band director in the world who knows about particle physics, and they're just going to skip right over it no matter what it sounds like. It doesn't even matter. And secondly, if they were to publish it and they were to sell it, I would get screwed on the deal by publishing that. And quite frankly, that is one of my own personal favorite pieces that I've ever written. I'm not about to sign that over to a publisher. That's mine. I'm keeping it.
Yeah.
So
that's something that I don't think we've really addressed. You guys need to realize that you give up a lot by having something published.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But you get stuff, you get infrastructure, and you get them doing work for you, but you do give up a lot. Yes, Jeremy.
How have you seen the young band music progress over the past 10 years, and where do you think it's going? I mean, obviously it sounds different now than it did 30 years ago or 20 years ago. So how has it changed, and where is it going? What's influenced that?
Well, I think the biggest change has been that that a lot of the music that's being written for young band, for any young ensemble, band, orchestra, choir, whatever, now is a lot of it is being written by actual composers, and not just band directors who need to whip up something that sounds decent on a spring concert and that makes their kids sound good. You have actual composers who have discovered that, hey, if you write stuff for a band instead of an orchestra, you're probably going to get more than one performance, and you're probably going to get performances year in and year out because, well, how many orchestras are there in the United States? You got your big professional ones, right? And unless your name happens to be John Adams or John Corigliano or John Luther Adams or basically John somebody, you're not getting your music played by the New York Philharmonic or the LA. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. You got your regional orchestras. They, if you know somebody who knows somebody who can, get you into a meeting and whatever, then you might be able to get a piece played by a regional orchestra, maybe if you're lucky. But bands, I mean, they're in almost every middle school and high school in the country. You can't swing a cat without hitting a community band. They're just all over the place. There are so many of them, and they're always looking for repertoire. The only problem is they are all amateur groups for the most part. So that's the trade-off. So it's, yeah. But composers have in the past, say 20 years, they've recognized that, well, if there is that trade-off, but if you write for bands, you're going to get your music played. You're actually going to get to hear it. You're going to get more than one performance, and that one performance won't be some half-assed performance because the orchestra had to had to spend most of the rehearsal time on, say, that Brahms symphony or that Mahler symphony or whatever instead of your piece, because that's what people are really coming to hear, Brahms and Mahler. They're not coming to hear you because you're not dead yet, and you, quite frankly, you haven't been in the canon long enough yet, so nobody knows you yet. As composers have found that writing for band that it's a pretty decent outlet for their for modern composition and getting multiple performances. You are getting better and better quality band music that's being written, and a lot of it gets self-published, and you're finding that the publishers, the music publishers, more and more are they're kind of being left out of the game. It's a little bit like when Napster kind of crashed the top 40 recording industry. It's that kind of thing that's been going on, really. In terms of the actual music itself that's being written for young bands, the quality is getting better, I would say.
Excellent. Jacob, you had a question?
Yeah. Going back into young band music and wind ensemble music, is there a area of writing that you favor more than the other?
It depends. It depends on what the specific project is. Writing for a wind band where I know that they're going to be able to play anything I write, something that's for professional college level. I do. I guess in a lot of ways I do enjoy that more because I can get away with a lot more. A lot of my more out there ideas I can try out. I have access to enough instruments that I can do a lot more things orchestrationally. I can. There's just a lot more that I can get away with. So in that sense, I do prefer writing for wind ensemble, but writing for a young band has its advantages too. I think writing for a young band has made me a better composer because it's forced me to really limit myself and really limit my materials and really limit what I'm going to do with those and still make the piece work and still make it sound good. So that right there is a challenge all in and of itself. I don't necessarily enjoy the process while I'm in the middle of it because it's really hard and frustrating, but I enjoy it in that I really appreciate it. I really appreciate what it's done for me as a composer.
We're considering starting a project in the fall where we form a relationship with some high school or possibly middle school and write for them chamber pieces. So I was wondering, and this is actually, I have no idea about this, if you've ever written like chamber music for young musicians.
Not that I can remember. If I did, it was a long time ago, and it was probably a piece that was back in the day before I knew how to write music. So I'm gonna say no. No, it's never come up.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to be, I'm sure, a different process than writing for a young band, because then you're still, certainly you assume you're going to get the best players, but still you're going to be pretty limited in what you're able to get away with. So
right,
interesting project.
And you're not going to have the security of doubled lines and such. It's going to be a lot more virtuosic just by its very nature because it's chamber music. So you're going to have to be really careful with what you do, because those your high school or middle school band students, if there's only 3 or 4 of them in a chamber group, they're all going to be really exposed, and you don't want to write something that is going to embarrass them if they get it wrong. So that would be the primary concern that I could think of with something like that.
Absolutely. Does anybody have questions? One last thing I wanted to talk about, and I kind of know the answer, but talk about the importance of listening as your growth as a musician and a composer, and what kind of music informs your compositional process. Like, I know that you listen to a lot of music and things from Ravel to Brahms to whatever, and it's the whatever I'm interested in mostly. Do you listen to, and how much of an impact does it have on what you write?
It has it has a huge impact on what I write. And yeah, I'm a music junkie, basically. I will listen to anything at least once, generally more than once. One of my favorite things to do back in the day was to go to a CD store back when those things still existed. And I go digging through the classical music bins, the Naxos recordings. They record a whole bunch of stuff that nobody else records, and I look for composers and pieces that I had never heard of. And for like for $4 to $6, I get a CD and possibly a new experience. And sometimes it was a gamble, because sometimes there's a reason that it was that nobody had ever heard of that composer or that piece, because it was terrible. But sometimes it really paid off. That's how I discovered composers like Martinu or Radovara, or I can't think of anyone else off the top of my head at the moment. But yeah, I would literally listen to anything I could get my hands on. I still do. And it's not just art music or orchestral music or classical music or band music. It's it's okay. What's the latest hipster band that Pitchfork is touting as the greatest thing ever this week? Well, I'll go check out their tracks. Oh, cool. Nine Inch Nails is in town. I guess I'm gonna go see that concert. Megadeth, yeah. What's up? Yeah, sure. Why not? I grew up on Megadeth and Metallica. Why not? So yeah, I will literally listen to anything, and I will steal shamelessly from all of it and put it all together into my own mix, to the point where hopefully no one will recognize exactly where I stole the stuff from, because it's stolen from so many eclectic sources. But
do you find that highly electronically controlled music that is rich in layers and timbres kind of gives you orchestrational ideas?
I think the answer to that question is found in the standard model right there. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of what I did in the standard model was I was trying to simulate electronic effects acoustically, to varying degrees of success. But
Radiohead.
Yeah, Radiohead. What's up?
I got
Shadow.
Dr. Schoendorff into Radiohead, by the way.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
All right. Anybody else have any more questions? So what are you working on right now, Matt?
Well, now that the trio is done, I am working on well, in the immediate future, I am working on grading some freshman theory quizzes. But no, my current ongoing project is this chamber opera that I'm writing. And it's something that I'm doing mainly because I've never written an opera before. I'm primarily an instrumental composer because I'm an instrumentalist. I grew up playing euphonium and tuba, so it's been a really interesting learning experience.
Do you have a guaranteed performance in the bag for that when it's done?
Yes, because the librettist also happens to be a coloratura soprano who will be playing the lead, and she has her own opera workshop company where she can put together a few performances of it at some point when we get.
You know her personally, and that's how the project got started.
Right? Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And that's that right there is one of the biggest keys to success as a composer. Is just who do you know? And a lot of times, which performers do you know? Those are going to be the people that, if you write music for them for free in college, and then when they get out and they get their college positions or their teaching positions or whatever, and their requirements are that they have to do professional activity, like say, I don't know, commission new works. Well, who are they going to turn to? They're going to turn to the composer that who wrote them a piece for free back in college. and that they hung out with and drank beers with back in the day. So yeah, get to know your performers and yeah, make friends. That's really the only way that otherwise your music doesn't really exist as music. It's blueprints until somebody plays it. So
I like that. So you guys remember the H2 saxophone quartet? Dr. McDonald wrote them a piece. Dr. Wilt wrote them a piece. Dr. Schoendorff wrote them a piece. I had a relationship with a different quartet, so I never wrote H2 a piece. I wrote a different quartet piece. But it's the same deal. What's that, Matt?
You missed out. Sorry.
Yeah. So, and just like, they are all tenured track faculty in the middle part of the country now and still performing together. So if Matt sent them a piece, they would give it serious consideration, and they're big shots in that world now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind and remember people's names, which I'm terrible at, and we should all be better at remembering people's names, because the next time you see them, the fact that you remember their name, they're going to remember that you remembered it.
Oh, that, and if someone is kind enough to play your music, somehow let them know that you're thankful for it. A card and beer and pizza goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maintain those relationships, because that's where your career is going to come from. Because random performer out of the blue is not going to contact you to write a piece, because they've never heard of you and you've never heard of them. So it's all about who you know.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Like I know Dr. Schoendorff, and this got him to come and do a masterclass for us for free. So let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Matt, thank you so much. This will be automatically posted on my YouTube channel, a video of this. So if you need to use it for embedding or anything like that, Dave has already used his for an application somewhere.
Oh,
so
okay.
It'll be right there. I'll send you a link.
Cool. It will probably end up on both my Facebook and Twitter. Just gonna the same. Yeah.
Absolutely. So it'll take I think it takes like an hour or two to finish rendering out after we're done, because it ends up being a pretty long video.
Right.
But I will send you a link when it's done, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.